beautiful humans. Welcome to Think Out Loud with me. I'm Natalie Peterson, casting in from my little neck of the woods in northern Colorado to you, in yours, wherever and whenever that might be. This digital adventure is an effort to turn years of internal chatter, wondering, silent suffering, and physical and mental close calls into enlightening and empowering conversations with others. Given how many choices you have to spend your time, I am honored that you're listening in. We moved last weekend. What a lift. Physically, emotionally, mentally. It was at times enough to flip the switch and send myself into a timeout to rest my body or my mind or both. We had help for much of the heavy lifting, thank goodness. Nonetheless, there were moments of overwhelm, but the conversations I had with myself and my partner and my son were all so distinctly encouraging, so distinctly different than moves of the past. What a lift, but what a relief. In moves past, emotions were off the charts, and the strain on my relationships was significant. There wasn't much different about what we were actually doing this go round, but how I reacted to it all, how I showed up, how I dealt with my anxiety and the anxiety of others, definitely different. Like grief and anger and other significant emotions, stress manifests itself in others in unique ways. Depending on our programming, our codependencies, our toolboxes of coping mechanisms and self-regulations, and importantly, our genetic and chemical makeup as humans, survival instinct of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is amplified in intense situations. Tempers can flare, tears can be shed. Some folks just walk away. Some bear down and get ugly. Some go silent. If you're like me, the empath, perfectionist people pleaser, some go nuts trying to manage the energy of the room and doing whatever it takes to quiet the chaos. Being aware, having the awareness of oneself to recognize and regulate such upswings in emotion takes work. It takes work to move from knee-jerk reactions of shit, what the actual fuck? Are you serious right now? Can you just not? To whoa. Yeah, I feel that. Yep. Here's where I slow my roll and, in my case, breathe and respond from a place of intention and mindfulness. The work, the details of self-awareness and self-love and self-regulation and self-management and anything self. These details have been of great importance to me over the last many years. As I've met and been mentored and connected with others with the same priority of growing emotional intelligence and mental agility, I'm amazed at the wisdom and compassion and creativity and commitment to a greater good those in my growing circle of humans has. We are here to help others. We are surrounded by beautiful people, eager to partner with us to heal and thrive and expand our potential. Of this, I'm sure. Oh, look, here's a beautiful soul with her own unique and Oh, look, here's a beautiful soul with her own unique and fantastic gifts of giving and supporting others. I'm excited to introduce you to Chrysta Bairre. Chrysta is an advocate for herself and others. As a child, she grew up in poverty, primarily in the Denver area, surrounded by family members with mental illness and addiction, while her own non-apparent disability went unrecognized and undiagnosed. A queer woman with several disabilities, she fought to get the help and support she needed to thrive and became a voice for unseen and underserved people like herself. Today, Chrysta is a career coach, speaker, and author, and through her leadership as founder of Live, Love, Work, and She Goes High, she helps women create balance, show up in their brilliance, advocate for themselves, and find happiness in work and life. Her book, Beautiful Badass: How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds, was published in 2020. I took part in a session a handful of months ago that Chrysta led on imposter syndrome. It was incredibly genuine and impactful, and I decided quickly I wanted to know her more. I've now attended the She Goes High networking group in Fort Collins and experienced firsthand Chrysta's commitment to a community that helps women rise together in all areas of life so that we may gain confidence, step into greater leadership roles, take up more space in the world, and make an impact in our communities. I know I've got some thinking out loud to do with Chrysta. Holy shit, where do we start? Chrysta, welcome. Say hello to my listeners.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today. And hello to everyone. Thank you for listening in for this conversation.
I've been looking forward to this. So, I mentioned your first book, Beautiful
Mhm.
Badass: How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds. In it, you share stories and lessons. You weave together your own journey through life to pull this awesome book together. I'm sure it was a load of work. Can you share a bit about the book, about and let it be kind of the introduction to your own journey and what brought you to this point?
Yeah, what I want to speak about is what inspired me to write the book that I wrote, which was I, I wrote a blog for 10 years. And, being a blogger, people kept asking me, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book for like years? And I was so resistant to this idea of writing a book. I was just like, what? No, I don't want to write a book. Like I would be genuinely annoyed that people kept asking me. And I had this experience over and over through my life that I shared with a friend one day. I just was like on my soapbox, like kind of venting about this experience. And this sharing with this friend this day is actually what inspired me to sit down and write the book that I had been resisting. And that was I had attended a women's conference, and the keynote speaker, the lunchtime keynote speaker, was presumably considered to be inspirational, right? It was like kind of an inspirational, motivational sort of keynote. And what frustrated me about sitting in the audience and listening to this keynote speaker was that this speaker's privilege was very, very obvious to me. This woman had so much privilege; it was just like oozing out of her pores. But nowhere in her talk, in her keynote speech, did she acknowledge or even hint that her privilege had anything to do with the success that she had gained in her career. And I have this really familiar feeling because so many times I have sat in rooms and listened to speakers, or I've read books, or I've seen these, thought leaders out there, and they so much of the time are sharing their perspectives. They're sharing what success looks like. They're sharing how to live this life of your dreams. And they're like encouraging people to go after their goals. And they're doing it from a place of privilege, not acknowledging that role that privilege has played or that they even have any. Because I could be wrong, but I think they don't even know. I think they don't realize even the role that privilege has played, which doesn't mean they haven't worked really, really hard. It doesn't mean they haven't shown up and put the effort in day after day. But I grew up poor. I grew up in poverty in the Denver metro area, and there was a lot of mental illness rampant in my family. So much so that I have multiple invisible disabilities that went undiagnosed because the people around me when I was growing up had these really significant mental health issues. And so all of my challenges were not even noticed. And so I've lived this life over and over again of being in all these situations where I knew from my lived experience that I did not have the same opportunities and I did not have the same access as many of my peers. And I lived so many times that people in my world would just sort of make these statements like, well, you just go do this. Well, you just go do that. And I knew that that was not an option for me. So, like, a great example of that was particularly when I was in high school. And at that time in my life, my mom was in and out of the psychiatric hospital. And there were times that there was no adult at home, it was just my sisters and I. During those times that my mom was hospitalized and there was no other adults, no one helping support, I had a younger sister, and I would walk a mile to the grocery store and a mile back. I would make sure my sister had dinner. I would make sure my little sister had her homework done before I even sat down to work on my own. And so, like, that's just an example of how people would say, particularly when I was in high school and we were talking about future opportunities, and they're like, oh, you just need to, research all of these schools and you just need to apply for these scholarships and apply for these, different loan programs and all this stuff. And there were times that I was like, it's all I can do even to get my own homework done because I don't have access to a car. I'm taking care of myself and my younger sibling. There's no adult at home. My mom had me added onto her bank account as a signer. So when she was not there and, money came in, I would walk over to the bank to deposit it. I would take the checkbook out. I was writing all the checks, right? Like I did not have the resources to be researching colleges and applying for scholarships and doing all of these other things, right? That seemed so easy for everyone else to suggest that I just do. And so that has been my lived experience so much of the time. And, feeling frustrated with these people that don't acknowledge the role that privilege has played or that they even have privilege. And in this one particular event, this women's conference, it was a women's small business conference. And when I looked around at the women in the room, I kept thinking to myself, like, these women here, they don't have my exact lived experience. But I'm like, I would be surprised if any of the 200 plus women in that room had an Ivy League education like the speaker did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so many of the stories and examples that this keynote speaker was sharing about how she got to where she was, honestly, really, she got those opportunities because she had an Ivy League education, because she had the pedigree, because she had the background. She was able to open doors that were not accessible to the vast majority of people in the room. And so, like, that was the moment that I decided I was going to write Beautiful Badass, How to Believe in Yourself Against the Odds. Because I was like, you know what? I'm tired of the fact that this gap is not being addressed, like the privilege gap. I'm tired of being told how to be successful in business and in life from people who have no idea what my lived experience is. And they're not even acknowledging the role that privilege has played in theirs. Because there's a lot of people out there that have challenges, both seen and unseen, that nobody knows about. And the reality is to be successful and to be happy and to have a fulfilling life, when you face systemic barriers, when you face challenges, whether they're seen or unseen, you can't just do the same things that everyone else is doing. And in fact, believing that that's your path to success leads to so much discouragement and disappointment. If you feel like the only thing that's keeping you back from success is like you're not trying hard enough or you don't have the right mindset, like that's not always true. Like there's other factors to consider. Sometimes we need to get resourced in whatever gap may exist.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes if we can't get resourced in whatever gap may exist, but you are facing systemic oppression of some sort, it's like your journey may be slightly different. It may be longer. It may be a little bit more challenging, right? And we don't talk about that enough. And so that's what really inspired me. That's what Beautiful Badass is about. It tells a lot of my stories about growing up in poverty and growing up in this household with a lot of mental illness and how I had to consistently find my own path and advocate for myself and do things differently than the other people around me because the way that other people were doing it was never going to work for me. I did
Mm-hmm.
not have the same benefits. I didn't have the same opportunities. And so the book is really for anyone who's just, it's designed for focused on women, but it's really for women who are like tired of basically they're trying to do all the quote unquote right things and they're not getting results. And it's like, hey, maybe the problem isn't you and your efforts. Maybe it's the advice that you've been following. You need to find your own path. You need to carve your own way. And maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe there's something wrong with the system. And you're still in it and you still have to overcome these challenges, but you don't need to take that burden on yourself like you are somehow inherently flawed
Mm-hmm.
because you can't get the same results as someone who has way more opportunity and way more access.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you for sharing that background. It's, the concept of privilege is was very unfamiliar to me. And then realizing my own privilege and knowing having a realization around blinders that I had up for uh, much of my adult life. Um, but then the freedom that came with the acknowledgement of them and letting them go rather than deny them. Um, it was such an eye open. I remember first hearing. I can kind of remember the first hearing the concept of privilege and thinking, "Whoa, where do I fit into this?" And then swallowing it piece by piece and thinking, "Holy shit, holy shit." Yes. I mean, feeling like circling around the concept all of my life and being what I hope is and what I hope I have been is a compassionate person, a person who would help the next person beside me without hesitation, would has the I have the mm, a love in my heart to sit down and have a conversation and figure out where I can help, right, and ask questions. But then there's just pieces of programming that had to be unwound, that had to be addressed that I didn't even have any concept. I mean, the closest I can that immediately bubbles up is how in the hell did after a DUI arrest did I get to ride in the front seat of the cop car? The hell? Thinking, am I really sitting up here? Wow. Well, this is comfy. I'm I don't know how to feel about this. Anyway, I appreciate you surfacing the topic and I didn't anticipate the topic necessarily, so it's got me a hair tongue-tied because it's a significant one. And, I think prior to hitting record, you and I were talking about these types of conversations and having the courage to show up in them and having the courage to sit on the other side of the table and listen to someone share their story and unwind some of the preconceived notions and prejudices and generalizations and, well, why didn't you? Well, you should. Like, right? And just recognize that each of us walk in very distinct, unique shoes of our own, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. And what an incredible upbringing for you. I I am humbled by your story, and um, I can imagine a little Chrysta um, taking care of people, and just a tremendous responsibility that you bore. Um, lived experience. Have you always been a teacher in this way of sharing this lived experience? You mentioned a blog, you mentioned, the book that came out of the all of this, but when did you start sharing your experiences in a way that helped connect with people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I didn't realize I was doing it, but I think I always did to an extent. Um, I mentioned a little bit about my history, but the part that I didn't know growing up, I knew I was poor. I knew that a lot of people in my family had very serious mental illnesses. What I didn't know is that, I'm autistic, but it was present, it was there, right? The signs of my autism were there. And it meant that I was isolated a lot. I didn't have a lot of friends. growing up. And so I tended to befriend the the few friends I did have, I tended to befriend the kids that didn't have anyone else either, like kind of the outcasts, right? Like me. And I do think that it was a little bit of my natural instinct to protect myself and others, and to kind of stand up and to try to share the wisdom and knowledge that I did have with others. But again, I didn't realize I was doing that. I didn't recognize my own contributions and my own power. But an early example of that I can think of, that I have a really specific story around, is in my 20s. I was part of a incest survivor support group. And as part of being in that program, we had a chance to do an outward bound program. So go up into the mountains in Colorado and do all of this like sort of personal and team building kind of work. And I was miserable the whole time. I'm not really like a camp girl. Like I'm an outdoor person, but not like a camping, like go up into the woods and like rough it, kind of a person. And I was just challenged in so many ways at Outward Bound. And on the last day of our program, there was a ropes course. So like really high up in the trees, where you had to like navigate, do all this physical activity on the ropes. And I couldn't go up, or wouldn't go up into onto the ropes course. I know that I have a fear of heights, or I knew that at the time, but now I also have the context to understand. In addition to being autistic, I have dyspraxia. I'm dyspraxic, which impacts my spatial awareness and balance and coordination.
Hmm.
And so and now I have the understanding to know that like part of the reason I have a fear of heights is because I'm already unstable, like even when I'm on low ground, right? And my spatial awareness is all off. And because of the dyspraxia and the issues with balance and coordination, like being up on the ropes course, it gave me tons of anxiety just like thinking about it. But I didn't know that at the time. And so I didn't go up on the course. And I was really disappointed in myself, right? And
Hmm.
and again, I think this speaks to what I was saying about why I wrote my book, because my perception of that experience at the time was that I felt like I had let myself down by not doing it. And the real reason I didn't do it is because I had undiagnosed disabilities that made that actually very difficult for me. But at the time, I didn't know that, and I didn't accept that. I felt ashamed. I felt honestly ashamed that I was the only person in my mind not brave enough to get up on
Hmm.
the ropes course. But what ended up happening was one of the other women broke a finger on the course. Like she was up there, she broke a finger, she was in a significant amount of pain, and there was no way for her to get down other than to get herself down. It was not the kind of situation that someone could go up and help her, or I mean, I guess in theory maybe somebody could, but like anyone who could have helped emergency services or whatever were like, it was like a 45-minute backpack into where we were basically. So she had to get herself down on this ropes course with this broken finger. And I was talking her through it from the ground. I was on the ground. I mean, everyone else was busy, like doing their own course. And like, I'm on the ground. I'm talking her through it. I'm talking other people through their course as well, because like they didn't have a broken finger, but it was challenging and scary. And I'm talking all of them through it. And in particular, this woman who had broken her finger. And at the end, we did kind of this like fireside ceremony, and people were sharing about their experiences. And I shared how ashamed I was of myself, that I hadn't gone up onto the ropes course, and that I'd let myself down, and I hadn't taken full advantage of this opportunity. And the other women who were there, particularly the woman who broke her finger, she said that my encouragement from the ground was so valuable to her. And she said, I honestly don't know that I could have gotten down without knowing you were down there waiting, and that you were guiding me through every challenge, every step of the process. She's like, you gave me the courage and the motivation and the insight and wisdom to do that, something that felt, when I was up there, she said she was terrified and she didn't know how she was going to get down. And she said, you helped me get down, and I couldn't have done it without you. And, even at the time, I didn't really acknowledge what that feedback meant. But
Hmm.
then, later on, I was able to reflect back on that situation as well as others, and be like, oh, I kind of have always leveraged like what has been hard for me and used it to empower and support other people. And I didn't even realize I was doing that.
It's beautiful. You were. Your bravery. It's cool.
I didn't
I
feel
love
very brave
you
at
didn't
that
feel very
time, but
brave. You
yeah.
were, yeah. You were brave for someone else. You dug deep. That's cool. And that was in your 20s.
My early 20s, I think I was like 20 or 21, maybe.
Mm. You mentioned autism,
hmm
neurodivergence. The term, from what I understand, was introduced in mid late 1990s. I don't know that well. I'll just speak for myself. The general there well, the general understanding of neurodivergency, I don't believe is broad. Um, there's no normal way of processing information and learning. So this isn't a normal versus abnormal distinction. Rather, the term neurodivergent is used to describe people whose brain differences affect how their brain works. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, and the terminology is like neurodivergent or neurotypical. So you're right, it's not normal. It's what's considered typical, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we can break down, we can challenge that idea of like what is typical brain function and processing, because I think there's actually a lot more neurodivergent people than was originally acknowledged or known when
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent was defined as a term. And so now I think of it more along the lines of it's less what is typical brain function, and I think it's more what brain function is optimized for our current society. That's neurotypical.
Mm-hmm.
What brain
Mm-hmm.
function is not optimized for our current society? That's neurodivergent. I mean, that's how I think of the differences, because really, I think that's what it's about. I read this great book called Unmasking Autism, and the author of that book really speaks to this idea of like, we consider someone who's blind to have a disability. But what if most people were blind? And what if our society was designed for blind people? Well, in that case, people who had vision might be considered to have like a superpower,
Mm-hmm.
but people who were blind wouldn't necessarily be seen as having a disability, because if society were designed for blind people, then it wouldn't be a disability, because the system would be designed to work for them. They
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't need accommodations to make it work. It would just work for them. And so in the context of neurodivergence, there's kind of a similar idea that is like, it's not that neurodivergent brains are dysfunctional in some way. It's like the challenges come in from the fact that society is not designed to play well with people who are neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And society has not been designed to play well with a lot of things that aren't, of a certain nature. And therein lies, I think, so much of, well, why this type of conversation is important, and awareness around different walks and cultures and disabilities and all of it is just so critical, just the awareness around it, and why the fight back is so profound, because you know I think there's a collective, I'll say it, an uprising around, a movement of compassion and nurturing that says we're not going to stomp on each other anymore for not being of a certain color, of a certain sexuality, of a certain, society. We're all on this planet with space, to live and breathe and be in our fullest and best selves. And every single one of us have a right to be here. Um, I love the concept that of superpowers rather than, disabilities. That there are different that differences are just that are beautiful. So it's important to me that conversations like this happen along the same lines. It's Pride Month.
Mhm.
Um, what does inclusion mean to you? I can fill in a lot of my own blanks just up to this point having this discussion, but I would love to know what inclusion means to you.
I mean, that's an interesting question because I don't know that I've had a lot of experiences where I felt inclusion. Um,
Mm,
I didn't feel it in any of the schools that I went to growing up, and we moved around a lot, so I went to quite a lot of schools, and I have not really felt it in many workplaces. There's been one or two notable ones that I felt it, but most of the time not. I mean, it's also part of the reason that I started my own women's community, She Goes High, because I was trying to go into other spaces to find connection and inclusion and belonging. And it wasn't that anyone was openly like rejected me, but I
hmm
didn't feel that sense of inclusion often. Even when people intended for me to feel it, I did
hmm
not actually feel it. And that was a big part of the reason that I started She Goes High. Because then I can just create the community where I'm included and I can welcome and invite people into it. Um, and so, when I think about what it really means to be included, I think it looks like being accepted, given grace, having people be curious about things rather than like having those sort of preconceived notions or those conscious or unconscious biases. People really coming in from a place of curiosity, people being interested in hearing about lived experience and what's your lived experience and how does this show up for you. I think that's a huge piece of it as well. An interesting thing about being a late diagnosed autistic person is that um, there's actually a study that shows that the average person can actually tell if someone is autistic within, I don't remember the exact amount of time, but it's like within several minutes, they can tell that somebody is autistic. And by that, I don't mean that they say that person is autistic. I mean that the average person is aware that something is different about an autistic person relatively quickly, right? Like
hmm
they can identify this person is not the same as me. Um, and I feel like it was an interesting study to read about. And I felt for myself, I'm like, oh, this is starting to make sense as to why I have had some of the experiences that I've had. Like you mentioned, sitting in the front seat of, the police car. I have not had that experience at all. I'm a white woman, but I have had way more negative experiences with police. I've been followed around in retail stores. I have been pretty consistently mistrusted. And I never understood why. Like I was always just like, everyone tells me that that shouldn't be the case, because of my skin color. Like I shouldn't be having those experiences, but I am having these experiences, and I don't understand why. And when I read about that study that said that, the average person can tell that someone is autistic, or that basically that there's something different about them, so quickly, I was like, I wonder if that's the reason why. I wonder if that's the reason why. During an apartment fire, of which I lived in an apartment in my 20s. There was a fire in the apartment. The police came knocking on the door. It was like 2 in the morning. They were evacuating our whole building. I'm standing outside in my pajamas, in the middle of the night, while the fire trucks are trying to put out this fire. And this police officer walked over to me without saying a word to me, handcuffed me, and put me into the back of his patrol car.
hmm
And I mean, why did that happen? Like, what was it that I did? Like, what was it about me or my behavior or the way that I was interacting in this environment that made him think that that was an appropriate response to walk up to me without saying a word, handcuff me, and put me in the back of the patrol car with
Hmm.
no explanation? No, I mean, basically, he held me, he imprisoned me against my will. I mean, I was never arrested. I was never like there was no explanation for why this happened. This was just his response to me. And I've had people in positions of authority respond to me that way, with a similar energy, not with the literal handcuffing and confining me. But I've had that happen enough times that I've always just been like, this is so interesting. And so I wonder if it is that piece of
Hmm.
like maybe people just pick up that something is different about me and then they mistrust because of that. I'm not sure. I still don't know that I will ever have an answer to that. Um, but yeah, so this like, what does it mean? What does inclusion mean? I mean, it's like it's not that, right? It's not
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not that we mistrust each other and that you walk up to somebody and without saying a word to them or asking them a single question, you physically restrain them, right? Like that's insane. That's it. That's insane. And here
Yeah.
I was like a victim of this apartment fire, like just standing outside
Right.
with no shoes on in my pajamas. Like, why on earth would that have happened? Um, you know, and so that's the opposite. That's the opposite of the feeling of inclusion when I think about what that is, right? And the inclusion is like the acceptance, the respect, the understanding that, even if something is different and I get a weird vibe, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to be
Mm.
curious about that before I make a judgment, before I, follow through on whatever story it is that I'm telling myself in my head about
Hmm.
the person.
Hmm. Wow. I love doing this conversation when I can literally feel my foundation shift to think about shit. That's why I do this, is to think about this kind of stuff and to be just humbled is not the word I'm looking for, but just perspective is so it's just it's strength to be able to, well, you talk about on your website about, and I've witnessed you in, as you introduce at She Goes High, and talking about authenticity, and that you want people to show up, forget about the elevator pitch, forget about, identifying yourself as your career and your title and your company. Come as you are. There's no need to, um I don't remember how exactly you put it, but like putting your game face on. And to me, like, that starts to tickle with the concept of, is there ever a space where you can walk in and come just as you are?
Mm.
That, and that breaks my heart. Yeah, like the that we don't accept people just breaks my heart. Ooh, that came out of nowhere. It also feeds when we're not comfortable being in our surroundings, and we're having to adjust, and we're constantly questioning our value within a space. I mean, just completely muted potential. And Um, I have to tell you that your story and your voice is exactly what we need to speak up and tell this, to shake people up. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so thank you for your bravery. I just want to say that, um, through the awkwardness of my tears and my all of a sudden runny nose, is just gratitude for who you are as a human.
It's an interesting thing because, at She Goes High, the idea that is that we really are trying to co-create an environment where every person who shows up is known to be valuable and worthy, and that we don't have to define that or justify it in any way. We don't have to know, oh, you're worthy or you're valuable because of these demographic factors, or you're worthy or you're valuable because, you have this much money in your bank account, or because you look this way, or, whatever the thing is, right? We At She Goes High, we really try to break that and create a space that is as open as possible. But I also have to acknowledge that I don't know that we can ever fully achieve that. We can just work toward that, because everyone who shows up at She Goes High, myself included, we're all humans. We're all humans. And every time we show up in a space and we're interacting with other humans, we're not only bringing with us our humanity, we're also bringing with us all of this conditioning that we have received, all of this experiences that tell us that we're not okay as we are, and that we need to be either more or less of this laundry list of qualities and behaviors and things in order to be right, or belong, or to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So, we bring that in with us every time. And we can work on that. We can be mindful of that, but it's still going to be present. We're still going to have times that we make mistakes. As a human, I'm going to have times that I make a mistake. I mean, an interesting thing about being a leader of a women's community is, people see me speak at She Goes High or out in the community at other places where I have speaking engagements, where they read my book. And it's honestly surprising to me, how often I'm held to this unrealistic standard as the leader of She Goes High. Like, people just think that, because I created this community and I can have this conversation with you, I must just be able to show up and do all this stuff perfectly all the time. And that ain't so. Okay? Like, that is just not how this is happening. And it was interesting to me because just a couple of weeks ago, I had someone who was part of our She Goes High community reach out to me and tell me how I had really hurt her feelings, because um, somebody had asked for a recommendation for a type of work that she did, and I had recommended somebody else that I knew did that kind of work, same kind of work. And she was like, I just can't believe you didn't recommend me. And you talk about this and She Goes High, and you talk about that and She Goes High. And like, how could you not, recommend a woman business owner when these are all the things you say? And I was like, wow, first of all, I'm a person, not She Goes High. And me giving a recommendation to the person I gave a recommendation to, I was not showing up as the organization She Goes High. I was showing up as a human. And I was like, I honestly just gave a recommendation of the first person that popped into my mind. And why was that person the first person? Because I had seen that person multiple times in the past few months. And I knew that this person did really good work. And so when someone was like, I need a recommendation, I was like, here's one. I mean, it wasn't like I thought of this other woman and was like, oh, screw her, I'm not going to recommend her. I mean, that wasn't the case at all, right? But I share this because it's that example of, like, even when we're trying to do this work in the world, or we are doing this work in the world, even when we're living and breathing and having the conversations about all of these different new ideas and ways that we are shifting the consciousness of the world, shifting the universal consciousness, we're still human beings that
Mm-hmm.
have individually we're carrying the weight of all of these years of conditioning. And sometimes all of those years of conditioning or the way that we're treated in society still, like sometimes that's just going to be present in moments that we're tired, in moments that we're stressed, in moments that we're just not fully present, just because we're just not. And it's like we're going to show up and still act, think, be that conditioning that we've received, even if we
Mm-hmm.
believe, even if our values say something else. And
Yeah.
that's the humanness that I feel like is so important to keep top of mind in any of these conversations too, is it's like we can talk about all these ideas, we can talk about all these concepts, and we have to continually, I believe, acknowledge and recognize our own humanness as well as other people's, and to say, like, I'm going to get some of this shit wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say the wrong thing and I'm going to embarrass myself. And particularly as an autistic person, I am, very high masking a lot of the time. That's how I learned to survive, was to mask. But I have to really be giving a lot of thought to social interactions to basically behave in a way that people feel like is acceptable. And if I'm having a moment that I'm not actively, like, intentionally putting a great amount of effort into thinking about every social interaction, which is what I do most of the time, but I'm now learning to practice unmasking. And so sometimes my mask is like not fully there. And then somebody gets offended or bothered by something I said. And of course, that was never my intention. And it's like walking that line between yes, I want to respect and honor and be curious and all of these things that I talk about, and I'm also a human being having a human experience, and this shit is hard. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard sometimes, and can I curse on your
Of
podcast?
course you can,
I'm
please.
gonna fuck it up sometimes, you know what I'm saying? And and that's cool, and I accept that. I've learned to accept that as a recovering perfectionist. I've learned to accept that in myself. But as a leader of She Goes High, and as a speaker and someone, who puts myself out there for public consumption in various ways through speaking in my book and all of that, I'm not always going to receive that same grace that I strive to give to myself and to others. And when I'm faced with those moments, what I try to do is give grace back to that person
Mm-hmm.
who's not able to give it to me in the moment for whatever reason.
Yep. Yep. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is grace and forgiveness, that there if there's a willingness, and what I experience in you, and what I hope I um portray is a willingness, right, to be present. And if something if something is said, if something is um comes out in one shape that or another that doesn't jive, that we are available to talk through it. If we're in the wrong, we apologize, um, and we make space for each other, and give grace. Absolutely. um, you mentioned speaking, you mentioned She Goes High. I want to make sure that people, you are so well networked around Northern Colorado and beyond. I want to make sure that folks that are listening in know how to connect with you if they don't already know you. Your shegoeshigh.us
Mhm.
is probably the safest spot to start, right? And then you are very active on social media. I absolutely adore your posts, and your vulnerability and your authenticity, and the way that you show up on social media. People can find She Goes High. Just type that in: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Meetup. You've got a ton of followers on Meetup. Where can people buy your book?
So you can buy my book on any online major retailer, such as Amazon or barnesandnoble.com, wherever you like to shop for books. My favorite way that people buy my book is special ordering it from your local independent bookstore. You can spend the same amount of money buying it from your local independent bookstore, and you get to support not only me as an author, but you also get to support that bookstore. And so that's my favorite option. You can
Mm-hmm.
also request it to be purchased at your local library if it's not already carried. I would love to see more people putting in that request for my book at their library.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are there any special projects you're working on that you want to plug, or any um last thoughts before we wind down?
Yeah, so, this isn't really a special project, but I want to start speaking this out into the world more. I'm in this phase of going deeper with my own identity and appreciating and understanding it better. And part of that for me, I think, is learning when and how to speak about my disabilities, my autism, about my being a queer person, right? I mean, you mentioned pride, and somehow in my answer, I didn't mention like, and I'm queer, right? You know, um, and so, there's that just feels relevant for me to start speaking out loud more and to start
Mm,
claiming and saying, um, I am a queer woman. I am disabled. I'm autistic, but I also have several other conditions that impact my mobility and balance and coordination. I mentioned, right? Like, you might see me out in the world with a cane, or you might not, because I might be having a day that I don't need that. You might see me out in the world with a walker because I might be having a time that I need that additional support just to get around. And so I'm just going to claim that out here. And this is one of the first times that I'm really saying those things. It feels vulnerable to reveal and to own and claim, because being queer as well as being disabled and being autistic are all things that um, are not always seen as a positive,
mm,
right? Um,
mm-hmm,
People don't like to think that they don't think as well of people in that scenario, but there's a lot of
mm,
unconscious bias, whether we intend for there to be or not.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, which makes your voice important, and the courage stepping into that voice. There's a there's a drive that you have that is fueled by the universe, that you're hearing, and that you're showing up for. And I highly encourage you to let that take shape. And whatever I can do to support you in that space, please never hesitate. Thank you for being you in all of your beautiful ways, and for spending a few minutes with me and in this space, and thinking out loud with me, and letting me have a quick cry, an overwhelm. It used to be on the daily, and so when it hits me now, I kind of shakes me. So it's good. I appreciate you. I appreciate your humanness and the connection that we just experienced together.
Mm.
And I want to thank you folks for listening in. Thank you for choosing to think out loud with me and my guest, Chrysta, today. Until we visit again, I would like to ask you to please go live with intention and live with love and a little bit of grace, a lot of grace. And please, 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 whatever you do, don't let anyone fuck with your flow. Big hugs, big love. Bye, friends.